Welcome, everyone. Today we will be concluding The Most Hated Woman in the World, Part 9. Now, when we had last left off, we had talked about the juror had come to a decision whether to go and charge Casey Anthony for the murder of Caylee Anthony or to find her innocent. And to the mob's surprise, the juror actually found Casey Anthony innocent. To quote one juror, she would say, "We're not saying that Casey Anthony is innocent, but we are saying that there's not enough evidence to prove that she is guilty." The entire world was outraged. How could you possibly find this woman innocent? And let's go back and retract some things that we had been discussing in this series. They would go and tell people there wasn't enough evidence, but there was plenty of evidence. Not to mention that they had found a stain in Casey's car that would confirm that is where Caylee was. There were strands of hair inside the car, and after DNA testing had also confirmed it was Caylee that was in the trunk of that car. When she had approached her boyfriend's house, Caylee was nowhere around, which would mean that something had happened to Caylee before she had even got to her boyfriend's house after she left the house. Not to mention the fact that when they actually found the skeletal remains of Caylee Anthony, they had noticed that there was not only just bags from her room and blankets from her room, but she was duct tape around her hands and feet, and even had duct tape wrapped around the mouth and nose. And what a lot of people don't know is they would even find bite marks inside the duct tape that was wrapped around her mouth. People were completely flabbergasted. And even how Casey was acting during the missing days of Caylee Anthony didn't help matters. The family, the whole world was trying to find this little girl, and Casey could not care less. They would go on to say that people grieve in different ways, but this is the face of a person whose daughter had went missing hours. She's not out looking for her daughter. She's not out there completely depressed and worried. She's out with friends, drinking, partying, posting things on social media, even going out and having a tattoo that says Bella Vita, which actually means it's a good life. And the judge would even go and tell Casey he would only give her 4 years for the child neglect and leading false information to the police and have to pay $1,000 fine. But he would also turn around and say, because you have actually sat and spent time in prison, consider it time served. So basically, she got away with murder. And if you remember, we had talked about an actual Zerneda Fernandez Gonzalez the police had actually found. And she would even go and try to sue for defamation of character. And the judge actually threw that out. It was said that the mob and the entire world not only sent death threats to Casey Anthony, but would also send death threats to the actual members of the juror. But this would not be the last time that Casey would actually be in court. After the events of the court, investigators and Casey would actually take Jose Boaz to court for a whole other different situation. You see, Jose would actually charge Casey Anthony over $300,000 so that he could sit there and be her lawyer. But Casey did not even have the money to pay for him. So according to investigators and Casey herself, they would go and testify and say that he would make Casey perform sexual favors for him. In case on one incident, he had shut down an interview on media television, and afterwards he would look at Casey and say that she owed him oral sex from shutting that down. There was one investigator that would say that they walked into the office of Jose one time and Casey Anthony was standing in his office completely naked. And they would have this almost deer in the headlight expression. Recently, Peacock did a documentary on Casey Anthony, and a lot of people have been more outraged, suggesting people not watch it and give her more credit than she's trying to get. Casey Anthony would say after the case that she surrounded herself with a small-knit group and doesn't go out in public very much. She would go and claim that the ghost of her daughter haunts her every night. Also in this documentary, they would discuss how George Anthony would be involved in a wreck when he tried to pull off into the interstate and would flip and roll his car. They would go and actually insinuate that it was a suicide attempt, but he would sit and tell people it was not. They would ask Jose if he would actually be in the documentary, and he declined. He said, "I wish her all the best, but I have no need or desire to be in a documentary when I have already gone and won a case for her back in 2011. It would be like taking 2 victory laps." Aside from Jose, other people would also go and say they refuse to even interview Casey Anthony because they don't want to give her any credit than she deserves. Even Nancy Grace had some very choice words to say.
A 2-year-old girl's head. That duct tape was found hanging off of Kelly's skull. That's one of the reasons I don't want to be part of such an interview. Like I'm somehow condoning it. Condoning an airbrushed, digitized version of her truth. She says she's going to tell her truth. Her truth is very different from the truth. And I'm not convinced that somehow my questions would not be somehow manipulated. There is a reason Tot Mom Casey Anthony did not take the stand to tell her truth, because she could not weather or undergo or survive an intense cross-examination. In these conditions where you've got a producer fluffing you up and throwing you questions that you know are coming, they're softball questions, that's no cross-examination. Also, whatever we get is going to be nothing but a pack of lies, and I don't want to be part of that.
In conclusion, I personally believe that this whole story is just appalling. It's completely heartbreaking that this child, this innocent child, was born, and her only crime was loving her mother, loving her family. And regardless what people say, I believe that Casey Anthony murdered her daughter. There was even a woman that was her cellmate that confirmed that she admitted to killing her daughter.
Well, she said that she used to knock the baby out so she can go party. And she would put her to sleep, and then when she would come back, the baby would still be asleep, and the next day she's awake. So that's how that came up.
Did she say what she used to knock her out?
I can't pronounce it. I can't pronounce it that well. Chloroform. I can't pronounce it.
And if you remember, the thing that she sat and said that she smothered her child with is the thing that she was looking up how to make at home before the events. I personally believe that Casey Anthony is guilty. And I personally believe that she murdered her own daughter because she was so selfish that she wanted to live her own life. The most heartbreaking thing about this is the person that Kaylee loved the most didn't care about her well-being at all. I truly hope and pray that this sweet girl finds rest in peace that she so rightfully deserves.